The Athlon Helos BTR Gen 2 2 to 12 by 42 in the first focal plane as seen here is, as near as makes no difference, a perfectly balanced rifle scope. For the mid to high 400s that you could find these for, this is about as good as you can get for an MPVO like this. Now for me, it has been perfectly fine. It has become my go-to rifle scope on one of my go-to bolt actions for fun, but do I trust my life to it? Well, that is still yet to be determined. There is a guy on rockslide.com that evaluated two of these and both of them lost tracking, but he is way more aggressive with his stuff than I could ever be, and for that I truly do appreciate it. Nevertheless though, for the price, function-wise, it's basically been perfect for me. I have a little bit over 1,000 rounds to this thing at this point, and it has been nothing short of fantastic. With that though, it left a question. How good is the rest of the Helos BTR Gen 2 lineup? Well, about 2 years ago, I had tested my first Gen 2 BTR, and that was the 6 to 24. And for the $500 that cost back then, I felt it was a perfectly fine 6 to 24. However, once I dubbed this scope of the year for 2023, I sent in that video as well as my full review video of this to Athlon, and they actually quickly replied to me saying, "We love your videos, would you like to test another scope?" Well, I saw it as a perfect opportunity to answer a question that I had asked myself. How good is the rest of the Helos BTR Gen 2 lineup? So, to answer that, why don't you come on in a little bit closer and let's take a better look at this 4 to 20. All joking aside, I am very excited for this. I like 4 to 16 scopes a lot, so a 4 to 20 could be better as long as the glass isn't overworked at the minimum or the maximum. And we will find that out together today. The 2 to 12 works extremely well as far as glass, minimum and maximum. It does get a little bit dark above 10x, but nowhere near in the realm of unusable. This is a 6x multiplier. This is only a 5, so I'm hoping that if the glass is the same from the 2 to 12 as in this, that this should be brighter and better as far as sharpness, brightness, and clarity go, especially with that larger front objective. Anyway, the box is quite lovely. This does look like an updated box to me. All the information we're gonna need is on the side, and it's just really well illustrated and done. Inside the box, or at least the box that I was given from Athlon, we have scope caps, sunshade, a battery obviously, Allen key with extra set screws for the turrets, and a throw lever. Know for a fact that 2 to 12 did not come with that, which is why I have an MK machining one on this. And I will say it does make a world of difference, even though the thumb ramp on that is pretty good, and the thumb ramp on this looks so far to be identical. It's nice to know that at least this came with one, but again, I don't know if this is just like a goodie bag that Athlon threw inside the box and sent to me. So please let me know if you have had a different experience on your end. Taking everything off the table and focusing our attention on the scope, I can say this is very reminiscent of the 2 to 12. Not only because the 2 to 12 is right next to me, but because this thing looks almost identical pound for pound, which is a good thing. I like seeing uniformity across a range of scopes, especially one that works as well as the 2 to 12 does. Starting at the back, we have a fast focus eyepiece. Again, this is factory fresh right out the box, all the way out. Quarter turn in. Pretty solid. Very solid. Very little to no play on this. Very, very nice. The magnification ring starts at 4 at the top, 20 down just shy of 6 o'clock, so a little bit less than 180 degrees of rotation. Thumb ramp does more than enough to have this be quick and easy. Excellent. Illumination control on the side goes from 1 to 6 with offs in between, but first, under the battery compartment, we have a standard 6-prong spring on top and a 3-dimple pad at the bottom. No surprise there. A standard CR2032 battery fits right inside, and the cap screws in with ease. Also note, we do have a big fat O-ring in there, so once this thing is fully secure, you do not have to worry about water getting inside. However, the other criticism that I had with the 2 to 12, and I've made with a lot of other scopes, is if you're going to have a battery compartment like this, they did a good job with splines on the outside. They actually feel really good and aggressive. You could almost cut your, in fact, you can see, I can cut my nail on it. It's great. It is a little bit smaller than the outside diameter of the illumination control itself, which again is a good thing. But if I really wanted to get in there and tighten this thing down, you've really got to be mindful and pinch this thing hard. And it can hurt your fingers after a while. Athlon does put their logo on this, so I understand why they don't want to put a coin slot here. But if they put just the Athlon over here, it would allow you to have a coin slot here, and it would be that much nicer, at least for me. Illumination control. Good detent. It rolls out, but pops in pretty good. Good enough feel that you know that you're making a turn. Almost no real sound to it though. Not the best, not the worst, but again, on par with the 2-12, which is more than functional. Our side parallax in this thing goes down to 10 yards to infinity at just about 180 degrees. Again, we have nice sharp splines on this. So grabbing this and adjusting this is cake. 10 to 100 yards is almost a full sweep. 100 to infinity is a short throw thereafter. One of the nicest things with the 2-12 were the turrets, and this 4-20 is no exception. The locking turrets on these are fantastic. Good solid feel and sound. The windage does sound a little bit more aggressive on the lock and the unlock, but the elevation is still pretty good. Once unlocked, incredible sound and feel, and very little play in the detent. Lock it wherever you want. It is very simply an excellent turret. Same thing with the windage. You have your 0, 1R, 1L, illustrated on both the cap and the body of the scope itself. The line coming from the body extends all the way to the cap. So this way you do not have to worry about being a little off. You know exactly where you are at all times. Looking underneath the elevation turret, again, we have the exact same sort of screw that has been in all of the Athlon products since the first one I've reviewed. Cap comes right off. There is our 0 stop, which is the same that we saw on the Midas TAC HD. The only difference is this also features a lock, whereas that one did not. Putting this back together is very easy. The splines on this line up very quickly and easily. You could see there's actually a little bit of play on the splines, but once you lock this up, that all goes away. As far as the weight, the box I believe said something like 27.8 ounces on this 4-20. Basically perfectly in line with what my scale says. As far as the 2-12, it does have a GG&G mount that is on it, and it comes in about 34 ounces overall. So more or less about the same weight, which is actually quite impressive. This thing feels and functions exactly as the 2-12, which is what I expected. However, is the glass on par with the 2-12, or maybe even better? Finally getting behind the Helos BTR Gen 2 4-20x50, and you are greeted with the quite frankly excellent APLR6 reticle. This is in the first focal plane and basically the only reticle you can get for this magnification range. Now for a lot of people out there, you might be questioning why would you bother with this magnification range when you can get a 3-18 or something like a 5-25. Well, it's all about that lower magnification number, and we're going to be taking a look at that in the comparisons towards the end. But nevertheless, I'm going to safely assume that you are specifically looking for a 4-20, and if not, hopefully you'll understand where the 4-20 sort of fits in like the hierarchy of the magnification ranges. At maximum magnification, the reticle fills out beautifully. There's no darkening to the image, and up here at 20x, we can shift side to side pretty far before we start getting a darkening to the image. This, again, only being a 5x multiplier means that it's probably going to be fairly forgiving, all things considered, and so far it already seems that way. The illumination on this is exceptionally bright. It's very clear, crisp, and fits the reticle quite well. The combination of a Christmas tree reticle and the entire thing being lit up like a Christmas tree with the illumination is completely standard and average for most manufacturers. Not all, but most. Illumination even at 4x in a fairly bright environment like you see here is also quite easy to pick up. So pretty damn impressive for this magnification range. At 4x, the exit pupil does seem pretty forgiving as well, but we will take a closer look at that momentarily. Other than that, this so far is shaping up to be pretty damn good. It would be hard to beat these turrets for $1,000 plus, but at $560, they're fantastic. Looks pretty good so far. Reticle lines up very well. Illumination down here is very, very nice. Fills in the entire reticle very, very well. Reticle lines up to my target quite well as well, and everything looks pretty good. Let's start with some slop test, windage. Beautiful elevation. Perfect. 4 and 4, looks like we're about 1/10 on the windage and about 1/10 on the elevation. Windage returns to 0, perfect. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. At 10 mils of elevation, we got 1, 2. We are 2 clicks off, or 2% on 10 mils of added elevation. Turns to 0 perfectly fine. Back out the magnification. You can see the reticle lines up more or less perfectly in line with the target, but at the very bottom, at the 10 mil line, we're probably about 1/10 of a mil off. I'm going to go up 1/10 of a mil. It lines up about right. So that means that the turrets are tracking within 1% of what the reticle is showing, not the target. 10 mils on the turrets, 1, 2, back 1. So it's 10% on the reticle and 2% on my target. Overall, not terrible at all. These turrets might actually be too loud for some people, because if you're running this thing hard and fast, it's going to alert everybody within an earshot of you. Ah, my beautiful backyard before it got completely overgrown with giant weeds that prevent me from actually getting back to this target without having to take my weed whacker and spend about an hour and a half to get there. What you are taking a look at right now is about a 27.9 foot field of view at 100 yards. So to that tree a little bit shy, because that's about 80 yards. At maximum magnification, our field of view will drop down to about 5.6. All in all, very average for the magnification range. The illumination here is insanely bright. It is brighter than you'll probably ever need it to be, but I'd rather it be too bright than too dark all the time. Also, one of its party pieces is at 20x. The illumination is still visible for a fair time out of the perfect zone for the exit pupil. So, very impressive to see. The reason why I like to see that is because if you're having a hard time with a bad position behind the scope, the illumination will help guide your eye back to where you need to be. Back in the magnification out to 15x, we have a slightly better performance, as we should. The illumination still being visible out in the shadows is very nice. As far as how sharp the reticle and the target downrange keep in focus to one another, when we are not perfectly dead center behind it, it is very good. It's not the best, but it remains more than sharp enough that you can pick out both the reticle and the target and see fairly fine detail behind it. When it's not a good performance, you'll know right away. At the minimum, at 4x, you could see there's going to be some warping to the image and some parallax shift between that close tree and that far tree. That is all completely normal. With the side parallax adjusted for the distance of the target, the illumination on full at 4x, you can dance around this thing. The Eyebox to it at 4x is so large and wonderful, and that is great because in conjunction with the reticle being visible and usable with the illumination off, that means that you could actually properly use this thing at 4x. And if you need the illumination on, it's clearly almost daytime bright. At 10x, we have still a large eyebox, and the illumination is still more than visible through this thing, even when you're not perfectly centered behind it. It is wonderful to see that this thing has a fairly good 10x. I'm a big fan of the 10x magnification range, whether it's fixed powers or, in this case, a variable power, but it's always nice to see that. At 15x, it's getting tighter with the eyebox, but the illumination is still almost perfectly visible behind it. This is the best performance I have ever really seen on a scope of this sort of magnification range, even like a 3 to 18 or a 5 to 25. Usually on a first focal plane, when you're looking through it, you can see the illumination, and once you start going into the shadows, the illumination disappears. This remains very visible even when you're into the shadows. So even here at 20x, and the exit pupil is pretty small, the eyebox is definitely going to be tight, you can still find the center of it because the illumination is visible. It's fantastic. Also, the glare on the back lens doesn't seem too obtrusive. I purposely did this in daylight, so this way you can see if there's any sort of glare coming off of it from bad coatings. That does not seem to be an issue here. This is so far shaping up to be an excellent performing optic, but how good is it in lower light environments? It's early evening, early spring. I think I filmed this in like April. And you can very clearly see we still have a fair amount of detail down there, but typically when you get behind a magnified optic, you're going to have some light lost in transmission. The illumination is, of course, more than bright enough for these lower light environments, and you could find almost the perfect setting at almost any brightness setting. I think that only having 6 brightness steps is not as fine as some people might like. I didn't really have an issue with it because I don't do that much shooting at night where I need it to go super dark. And I'm not going to be using this with night vision, but you might be. Nevertheless, increasing the magnification all the way to its maximum here at 20x, and we didn't really lose any brightness. That target looks very sharp and clear, and we can make out a lot of information on it. Yes, we might only be at about 75 yards, but that's still a very good performance. If you were planning on using this as a tactical/hunting scope, I think that low light performance is more than adequate, especially given this price point. If I didn't already mention it, the amount of scope biter that we see is a very nice in-between as far as Razor HD versus like an ATACR, which maybe you'll see in a little bit. Illumination here on this extremely bright sunny day is still slightly visible. Very good. You're only really going to need illumination in very bright conditions like this if you're just trying to create contrast in a very dark, shadowy area. And if, let's say, you were aiming at a target and trying to shoot at a target under a deep, heavy canopy like trees, you would have no problem with the illumination being visible there. These targets are roughly 5, 7, and about 1,000 yards apart. They're obviously large solar panels. This one is only a 2-pane. The ones in the back are 3-pane. We will be pushing this out to around 2,000-ish yards momentarily, and then seeing how well it can handle 10 mils of added elevation. There is a tiny touch of chromatic aberration on the high contrast areas. You can see it changing from green to purple, and purple, well, and then back to purple when we get the side parallax just so. It's very clearly noticeable, but it's not jarring like I've seen with even some high-dollar scopes lately. If there's one thing I can say maybe isn't the best, it's the color pop. Colors seem a little bit on the muted side, but not what I'd consider dull by any means. Sharpness and resolution here are very good. You can see all the peg stands on the left-hand side for people used to climb this thing, and that solar panel, even with those little tiny solar cells in it, looks pretty damn sharp and clear. Now, some of you out there might be going, well, see, I really like 4 to 16s. You even said you like 4 to 16s. You're absolutely right. And this is what the scope at 16x looks like. Is that much of a difference going from a 4 to 16, which should perform even better than a 4 to 20 in some cases, given the fact that it's a 4x multiplier as opposed to a 5x? Well, only you can really answer that. I do think that the difference between a 16, an 18, and a 20 is negligible for most people, because let's say you have a larger view looking through it, that will greatly increase the
overall size of the image that you're looking at and make it appear like you have more magnification. There are a lot of different weird things that happen with lenses. You could have some scopes that look like you're looking through a straw, and even though it has more magnification, it doesn't necessarily seem like you're that much more zoomed into the target. This thing, I think, is very well balanced being a 20x, but there are a lot of other 16x's out there that just seem a little bit more impressive, and we're going to be taking a look at one such example very soon. But again, I pull this back to 16x from 20x, and the image only looks even better. So maybe you want a 4 to 16, but you want the ability to go to 20x. This will very clearly do that and still maintain a very high level of sharpness and clarity. And at 10x here, it looks even better. Not to say that the 20x looks terrible, but typically the lower the magnification, the better it will always look. At 20x at about 1,000 yards with 0 mils of added elevation, and the side parallax being set the exact same distance for all three of these towers so far, it's really nice to see that the depth of field on this is as wide as it is. It makes it very versatile to not have to worry about going from one target at one distance to another target at another distance at any magnification and have to worry about constantly fiddling with your side parallax. Now, yes, some people would prefer a side parallax or a depth of field that's very shallow, so this way you could really focus on just your target. But for a practical environment and a practical shooting style, being able to just set your parallax good enough and have it be good for a wide variety of different distances and magnifications is really nice sometimes. But again, this is still at 0 mils of added elevation. So let's back out the magnification, add 10 full mils, and reacquire our same target and bring the magnification back to maximum to see if there's any loss of sharpness, clarity, or colors. The image does look a little bit darker, but you could also see that the view looking through the scope has also shifted. So the eyebox is actually shifted along with the adjustment of the elevation. So to compensate, I shift the camera down a little bit, and you can see that I'm riding that view looking through it. We go from one extreme to the next, but going down about 1/16 of an inch, not a whole lot, brings back a lot of the overall brightness, sharpness, and clarity that we looked at earlier. It still appears to be really nice and clear, but I'm going to adjust the side parallax just a little bit to see if we can eke out a little bit more from it. And truth be told, maybe just a touch. But it does look really good at 10 mils of added elevation, which is something that a lot of other scopes can't really do all that well with. While we have this thing at 10 mils and everything is perfectly focused, let's shift the camera side to side and check the stability once more. Both the reticle and the target both maintain a very good level of sharpness all the way up to the point where you can't look through the scope anymore. It's a wonderful, wonderful performance. And just for shits and giggles, I'm going to bring it back to 0 mils of added elevation and do the exact same test, just in case you want to hold with it as opposed to dial for it, and it's going to perform exactly the same. It is excellent. At 16x magnification, it's going to perform even better because the exopupil is going to get larger and larger, and this is the same exact story that we saw earlier, so let's skip ahead. So sadly, I don't know what the exact distance on these towers is. I went to Google Maps, I measured it as far as I could, and roughly guesstimated where I was, and that's about 2,000 yards to the farthest tower. So you could really see a lot of information at extended ranges with this thing. You could see a lot of mirage in the air, but it was a fairly cool day, all things considered. But this is a wonderful performing optic. Finally, getting into some side-by-side comparisons. The first up is going to be with another Athlon product. This is the Midas TAC HD 4-16 by 44. I had picked this up brand new around the same time that Athlon sent me the Helos, and I figured why not run these two side by side in conjunction. The Midas actually goes for about the same price as the Helos, but the Midas does not have a locking elevation turret or illumination. It's also about an inch longer at about 14.6 inches, where the Helos is 13.3, so actually more than an inch longer. We already know what the Helos weighs, but the Midas is about 4 ounces lighter, probably because it's got a capped windage, no illumination. Field of view, they're about the same at 4x. I'll actually give it to the Helos, 27.9 feet versus 27.7 feet. but their top end is going to be greatly different, again, because there's 4x total in the mix that we have to take into consideration. 5.6 to 7 feet, and then 3.6 to 3.7 inches of eye relief, respectively. This is an interesting comparison because they're both about the same price. They both have 4Xs at the minimum, but on the top end, you have the 16 and the 20X. The Midas is a very bare bones model. I wasn't expecting really much from it because what could it really offer? It offers exceptional glass clarity, perfect tracking, and a very simple overall setup. It's got a larger view looking through it, which does play to its strengths as opposed to the Helos, which has a slightly smaller view looking through it. The Midas also seems to be even better than the Helos when it comes to the eyebox and exit pupil standpoint, and it is an absolute wonderment and joy to use. I'm not saying that the Helos is not, but the Midas just seems like a stripper model like race car. It's just, there's so much less going on. It just feels really excellent. And it shows. Both of them look great here at their maximum, but the Midas does have a tiny touch more resolution and sharpness. The Helos is already a stand-in. It's fantastic, but I think the Midas just has a little bit better edge, partly probably because it only has a 4x multiplier as opposed to a 5x multiplier. Why did I roll this in? Well, like I said earlier, what's the real difference between a 16x versus a 20x at the top end? This is your case in point. This is a 300-yard target, and there's a 4x difference between these two. Yes, the Helos does have a little bit more magnification and it's very clear to see, but the Midas has way more field of view as a result of that thing's 16x. So, which is better? It ultimately is going to come down to you. I think it's more important about the bottom number. Helos 4 to 20 versus the T6Xi from Steiner being a 3 to 18 by 56. Now the Steiner does have a couple things going for it. Not only is the 3X 1X lower at the minimum, but it also has a giant view looking through it and a very large field of view. Steiner claims 37 feet at 3X, and that is a huge difference, especially when factored in with how much larger the view is looking through it. So what's more important to you? Having a top end number that's a little bit bigger or having a smaller number that's a little bit smaller? Ultimately, it's going to depend on what your ultimate goals are with this scope, but the 4 to 20 magnification range is a bit of an oddball in between. The 4 to 16s are very popular. I love them myself, but they just feel like a little bit more old school. The 4 to 20 tries to fill the gap between that and a 5 to 25, but if you're looking more like a high-end 3 to 18, there are a lot of benefits that go with it, especially in the lower end. At the top end, at 18x and 20x, there is less of a difference. However, the 6x multiplier in the T6, at least specifically this one, doesn't really necessarily stretch the glass out that much as far as it not being good, but it has very heavy chromatic aberration. But that's mostly like a Steiner thing as opposed to a 3 to 18x thing. But this is a example of a very large view and a very large field of view versus a good to average. I wanted to roll in the Miyapta Optica 6, but I really need to refilm for that because it's been annoying to see that with very old footage, and the T6 is much more relevant and newer, I should say. As far as how both of these look at their maximums at 300 yards, very clearly different times of year when I filmed with them. The Steiner does have exceptional sharpness and clarity, but so does the Helos. The Helos also has a much better reticle in my opinion. The MSR2 in the T6 was just very lacking. Even now, it's kind of hard to pick up, whereas with the Helos reticle, even if you didn't have illumination on, it'd be much easier to pick up, but the illumination is vastly superior in the Helos as far as maximum brightness goes. Price-wise, though, the T6 is 3 times the price, so it's not like this is an apples-to-apples comparison, but I wanted to give you an idea of what a good 3 to 18 would look like next to this. But I'd still prefer the Helos over the T6 just because the reticle options are better with the Helos, simply because you could use it for the entire magnification range. Going from one extreme to the next, we're now looking at the Tract Toric 4.5 to 30 by 56. I'm rolling this in because 4 to 4.5 doesn't sound like that much of a difference, but 20 to 30x, well, that's a huge difference. These tracks go for around $1,700 to $1,800, so again, about 3 times the price of the Helos. They're a little bit longer, they're a little bit heavier. Their field of view is 24.7 feet at the minimum, so actually very close to the Helos. But on the top end, you're talking about 3.7 feet, so almost half the distance. Eye relief is about the same, right smack dab at the middle, 36 to 38 inches. Now, why am I bringing this in? Well, we already looked at one where the magnification was a little bit less. Now we're looking at one where the magnification is a lot more, and does that make that much of a difference? Some people are going to say yes. Some other people are going to say no. The thing with having an optic like the Tract Toric, or even the Bushnell Match Pro ED, or the Gen 3 Razor, those maximum magnifications might have a very large number, but the exit pupil is going to be smaller, the Eyebox is going to be tighter, and they're usually going to let in a little bit less light. The Toric is pretty good as a scope overall. I don't think it's great. I do think it's a better 4.5 to 25 than it is a 4.5 to 30, as seen here. I pull out the magnification a little bit, and the image does sharpen up, and some of the chromatic aberration vanishes. But overall, the scope is just a little odd in some cases. A full review on this is going to be coming out soon. At 200 yards, you can very clearly tell that the Toric has a more zoomed in image. That backer is the exact same size on both targets. And yes, there is more magnification there. The image to the Toric does look very good, but it isn't that easy to get behind as opposed to the Helos, obviously. It might not seem that apparent here, but once we back it up to 300 yards yet again, you will see that, yes, there is now a much different size between these two. And the farther out you go, the more obvious it will be. But if you're keeping your targets inside of like 500-ish yards, I'd probably go with the scope that's easier to get behind. That's going to be with the Helos. But is there a huge difference between these two magnification-wise? At the low end, no. At the top end, yeah, there is. It's a 10x difference. But still, is it really that much of a difference for you? Which one would you rather have? I'd probably rather have the Helos and save, $1,200, $1,300, all things told. The Torics are really nicely made, but there's just something about them I'm not the biggest fan of. Taking a look now through the NightForce ATACR 4-28x50. This is a fairly new arrival for me, which the full review will be coming out kind of, sort of soonish. But I'm still doing a little bit of filming with it and testing. But at 4x, the view through the ATACR is minuscule. NightForce only claims 23.6 foot field of view versus the Athlon's 27.9, and it's very clearly easy to tell. However, once you start increasing the magnification, the view fills out quite well. There's tunneling to that thing. It's an American-made scope. It's $3,000. It's about a half-inch longer, but it's 8 ounces heavier. And the eye relief's about the same, but it's an ATACR, and it's $3,000. Fit and finish on the ATACRs are, well, almost perfect. I can't really complain, but they don't have locking elevation. This one at least has capped windage, which is nice. The reticle options on the ATACRs are insane, and so is the overall image. The sharpness, clarity, and colors on ATACRs are almost second to none when you get them dialed in just right. But again, it's $3,000. I'm only showcasing this because these are both 4-20s. And I am a big fan of the 4-20 magnification, as long as you don't need the lower end to be like a 3. The Helos is a very good optic overall, but it can't hold a candle to the ATACR when you start looking at the finer details, sharpness, colors, and contrast. The ATACR is on a completely different level. But the Helos is more than serviceable enough. I have been very pleased with its performance, especially for the price. It's right in line with the 2-12, and that is the most important thing to keep in mind. These are budget optics. They're very low budget. $500 might be a lot of money for some people, but when you start comparing it against scopes with similar specifications and they're twice the price, this thing performs very, very well for its price point. Its feature set is exceptional, and all of its controls are just very, very good. Can it really compete with an ATACR? Not maximum performance-wise, but it's not trying to, because it costs a sixth the price, and you can't forget that one, folks. It might sound like I'm ending this review on a bit of a low note, and that couldn't be any farther from the truth. This, just like its smaller brother, the 2-12, is an exceptionally good performing optic for the price point and its magnification range. I was hoping that this would perform at least on par with how the 2-12 functions from minimum to maximum, and I think it excels beyond the 2-12, mostly because this is only a 5x multiplier versus that thing's 6x multiplier. It might not sound like a lot, but it makes a huge difference. Just like what we saw earlier with the Midas TAC being a 4-16 that only had a 4x multiplier, that does have a sharper maximum magnification, albeit if I did pull out the Helos to a 16x magnification to rival that of the Midas, it would be a lot closer than it is at 20x. However, if you think you need that little extra magnification on top, I do feel like the Helos can perform very well at its maximum, even with 10 mils of added elevation that we looked at earlier. It doesn't have any of the nuances that I don't like with some budget optics. Very low chromatic aberration, very stable image and reticle when you're off center, very bright illumination, an exceptionally good reticle. It is the same reticle that is in the 6-24 that I reviewed many years ago, but in that, the colors and the contrast were a little bit on the lower side. This seems to be a much better setup magnification range for the glass. But being able to use this thing at 4x, even seen here, it's easy to pick up where the center is. And to the naked eye, it's even better. So it's great having a reticle that you could actually use for the entire magnification range. Not a lot of scopes do that. It's very easy to pick up where the numbers are on the drops for the elevation, but also the wind holds. And it's got a very fine center dot, which I know a lot of precision shooters are looking for. I really can't stress this enough. This reticle is excellent. Factor that in with all the other features and controls on this thing, and it really is a compelling argument. I can't find anything really wrong about it. Some people might be saying I'm saying that just to say it because Athlon sent this in. I don't want to upset Athlon, but it's the truth. If this thing was $1,000, I'd still say it performs really well for the price point, but it's almost half that. $560 is not a lot of money for a scope that performs like this with all of these features. I can't really think of a better optic for this magnification range. The Tract Toric 4-20 I reviewed a while ago, I got a second one of those in and I tested it out and it was the exact same performance. The image was lackluster. They're made in Japan. The finish on them is excellent, really good high quality materials. You can tell that these Heloses are made out of a lower grade aluminum, but again, that's to keep the price point down. I would love to see Athlon come out with a Chronos HD version of this scope. I would also love to see them come out with a Chronos HD 2-12. I had mentioned something to the individual at Athlon when I had gone back and forth via email with them, and I asked them if they were ever planning on doing that, and all that they could say was, we cannot answer that. I hope that means that it's in development and they're waiting for it to debut. I will keep my fingers crossed. I've only heard amazing things about the Chronos. If you have a Chronos and you want to send it in for me to review, I would love to check that out. Because at the price point that those come in at, if it has that extra special sauce with the higher quality materials and just a little bit polish here and there, it would be unbelievably nice. Anyway, this review has gone on long enough. This is a very, very nice scope. It performs and functions extremely well. If you're on the fence about going with a 4-20 versus a 3-18 or a 5-25, you really got to figure out what's more important to you. But if you decide that a 4-20 would be a nice option, a nice fit, I think you'd be very satisfied with how the scope performs. With all that being said, a huge thank you to Athlon Optics for making this video possible. They did send this in for me to review. If anyone out there is doubting that this review is as honest as can be, just go back and watch the video muted and just see for yourself how well this thing performs. Put it side by side with any other optic of this magnification range. Go watch my Tract Toric 4-20 video again, because even though I had a second one of those, it performed exactly the same way, and it was just lackluster. This is a very good optic, and I highly recommend it, and hopefully you can appreciate that. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. As always, I'll see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.